How Medakiapi. Hello. Chande Westea na prechi yuzapi. Tom go to Hemakiapi do. The kota ia matro awayakapi. Navajo dene hemacha. Nga bede wakantawa hunkawayedo. It's good to be here. And I'm not Dune Lankard, but I've been honored to introduce my friend, my brother, Dune. A native Athabascan Eyak of the Eagle clan from the Copper River Delta of Alaska, Dune was a commercial fisherman in Prince William Sound until March 24, 1989, when the Exxon Valdez spilled over 11 million gallons of oil into his homeland. On that day, his life was changed. He became an activist and a social entrepreneur, dedicating his life to the protection of indigenous and human rights and the fight for environmental and economic justice. For his work, he was selected by the Time magazine as one of the heroes of the planet. He is a co-founder and member of the Red Oil Alaska Native Grassroots Network. Red Oil, a project of the Indigenous Environmental Network, stands for resisting environmental degradation on indigenous lands. Through Red Oil, NIEN, Dune, and many other Alaska natives, such as Faith Gemmel, Robert Thompson, Earl Kingick, Yvonne Peters, and many others, legally challenged the U.S. government to halt its leasing of the offshore continental shelf from massive offshore drilling in the Chukchi Sea. Dune Lankard is one of the inspirations of the Fire Fund, an endowment to help Alaska Natives in their struggle to defend their homelands. Dune is a member of the Eyak Nation and of the Eyak Traditional Elders Council. He's founder of the Eyak Preservation Council and founder of the Native Conservancy Land Trust. He is a fellow of the Ashoka Fellow and a fellow of the prime movers of the Hunt Alternative Fund. Before I call him out, he's asked me to sing a song. So I'd like to have everyone stand. When I sing this song as one of our sacred songs in Minnesota with our Dakota people, you extend your thoughts, you extend your heart to that place that is sacred. And if we are sincere and focused in everything that you want to be and our world to be, there will be a response from the sacredness to you. Way way yo ho ho yo way hey 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 yo yo way yo ho ho yo yo way ya 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 way hey 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 yo yo way yo ho 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 yo mitakiasi Dune Lankard.
Hello, Bioneers. and organized here. Thank you, Tom, and all the Bioneers, all over the place. I'd like to thank Kenny and Nina as well, and all the Bioneers staff for making this event possible. And I'd like to say hello to my friends up in Alaska and in Seattle and all the different satellite places that we're plugged into today, because today we're one tribe. And I'd also like to say hello to all my friends. I've been able to see some of you at different events, and there's several Alaskans here as well, so it's an absolute honor to be here with all of you today. My Eyak name is Jamatsuki, and which means the little bird that screams really loud and won't shut up. So the timekeeper, if you could just point your hand, okay? So you can tell me when to shut up. My people, the Eyak, have lived along the Copper River Delta for the last 3,500 years. We migrated from the interior of Alaska down to the coastline. And we probably inhabited about a 300-mile stretch of homeland between Yakutat, which means an Eyak word for lagoon behind the sea. And we migrated to the west, ended up in Cordova in eastern Prince William Sound. I would like to make a disclaimer. I cannot see Russia from my home. And the other thing is a point of context for you is that along with being a part of the Eyak Traditional Elders Council and an Eyak Native, I've also been incorporated into an Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act corporation. And unlike in America, where the indigenous peoples were put on reservations, land reserved for Indian people, they forced us into forming native corporations up in Alaska. So as I speak, that'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So rather than receive the lands and have sovereignty and tribal ownership, the land in Alaska held by native peoples are owned by the native corporations, which we're all shareholders of. I grew up fishing in Prince William Sound in the Copper River Delta with 7 little Indians. Mom, she was an amazing woman. She would always tell all of her children that there was nothing stronger in this world than your belief in yourself and your dreams. And one tide alone, my mother dug 2,000 pounds of razor clams. That's an amazing feat. And as I was growing up, I watched the razor clams disappear in my lifetime. Growing up on the ocean, I experienced, as a fisherman, we would take our trash and we would just dump it overboard. And all the fishermen did that. And I asked my father one day, I said, why are we doing this? This is our home and this is where we fish. Why would we ever want to do this? And he said, what are you, an environmentalist? And I was like 7. I was like, I go, why would you want to throw the trash into the water? Because it ends up on the beaches. And so within about 4 or 5 years, all of the fishermen then started loading their trash on the tenders and bringing it in the town. So no longer did that happen. When I was in my early teens, I was crab fishing with my family, and in the crab pots, there's no way for the mamas and the babies to get out of the crab pots because there was no outlets for them to escape. And so I asked my dad, I said, well, you know, how come we don't have an escapement for these little crabs and the mamas and babies? And he said, what are you, an environmentalist? I said, well, it just seems to me that if we're going to keep fishing for these crab, then they have to escape so we can have ones in the future, right? And so within a couple years, he dropped these hog rings and these rings onto the floor of the shop and said, "You got your wish. Put these hog rings in and you'll have an escapement hatch for the future crab." But but unfortunately, within 5 or 6 years, the crab were fished out as well. And I remember seeing the first kayak and the first sailboat come into Prince William Sound. I knew that we had been discovered, that the last of having this incredible paradise to ourselves was over, that I realized that I was going to have to share it with the rest of the world. And that was tough, because I remember when another boat would come into the bay that we were fishing, my father would leave, and we're like, "Another human," and we're waving, and he'd want to take off. He'd go, No, there's too many people in this bay." And so we grew up fairly isolated, but we lived off the seasons of animals and the seasons of salmon and the herring and halibut, and it was just absolutely incredible. And I believe that it would last forever. But as Tom said when he was introducing me, the Exxon Valdez oil spill changed my life. It was the nation's worst oil spill. And unfortunately, it took the nation's worst oil spill to wake me up. And to me, that was the day that the water died. That was also the day that something inside of me came to life. And I realized that I would have to become a formless warrior, that I would have to figure out how to become a defender of my land and my people, and that I would have to be louder than everything else. And that was difficult for me because I had never spoken publicly before, and I was terrified. But I was fortunate to have several incredible activists, community activists in our community, Rick Steiner, David Grimes, Rick Eyak, later Carol Hoover, Karen Button, just amazing activists that came together, and we were able to do the unspeakable and impossible, which I'll share with you in a moment. But in order to learn how to speak publicly, what I did was I went up to this place where a log had fallen down for natural causes, and this log was laying across this spot, and it was about 25 feet in the air, and I'd walk out on the log, and then I'd start speaking, and then when I would lose my concentration, I'd almost fall off the log, and so I had to really focus, and so it helped me. And I remember right before the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council met in Anchorage for the first time, and I wanted to go up there and speak in behalf of the land and the animals and our people, and be a voice of reason and a voice for the ones who couldn't speak, which was the wildlife and the salmon. And so I'd asked my sister Pamela to come along with me, but prior to that going up, I went out to Eyak Lake and to the sacred spot, and I started saying my prayers and talking to the spirits that be and our ancestors. And I said, "I need your help. I need your advice. You're going to have to help me because I have no idea what I'm going to say. And I'm scared. And I need to see a green arrow in the sky." And it was foggy, it was drizzly. What were the odds of that happening? And it was September, early October, silvers were running. And after venting for about an hour at the top of my lungs, the clouds kind of parted, and there was like an opening where I could see Eyak Mountain, which is this old crater, this old volcano crater, Eyak Mountain. And all of a sudden, the northern lights just started dancing, this beautiful chartreuse green, this brilliant green behind the silhouette of Eyak Mountain. And all of a sudden, that cloud opening became like this halo of green light, and it came down to the water and came shimmering across the water. And silver salmon started jumping, splashing in the ripples of water, and an eagle flew over the top of me and shrieked. And it shrieked, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I was like, now that I have your attention. And so I went off for another hour, and I said, you had better be there, because I'm going to go up there with a blank sheet of paper. And so the next day, I flew up to Anchorage. So I flew up to Anchorage, and there was my sister Pamela, and we're sitting there, and I have my piece of paper there, and she said, well, is that your speech? And I said, yeah. And so she's sitting next to me, and she's getting kind of nervous, and she picks the piece of paper up, and she turns it over, and it's blank on both sides, and she says, Dune, I think you have the wrong piece of paper. And I said, Pamela, don't show that to him. It's a paper arrow. I said, our ancestors are going to be here today. And she goes, oh, yeah? And I said, yeah, I spoke to them last night at Eyak Lake. And they're going to be there with us. And I said, so trust me. And all of a sudden, I could feel her hands, because she was holding my hand, I could feel her palms getting really sweaty. And she's like, oh, my God. And she goes, what are you going to say? And I said, I have no idea, but they better show up real soon. And so my time came, and I was able to speak, and these words flowed from me that I had no idea where they come from. I remembered things that I never knew, and I saw what I had to do in order to be this voice of reason and to be able to be this formless warrior. And one of the lawyers from the Trustees Council came up to me afterwards and asked me for a copy of my speech. And I said, well, I gave her this blank piece of paper, and she goes, oh, my God. And I said, well, I didn't know what to say. And she said, I would have likened that speech to Chief Seattle when he lost his land. But one of the things that really woke me up was when I was younger, I used to pioneer fisheries around the state of Alaska and also in Arizona to remove the carp, which is a rough fish, and the buffalo fish out of the lakes for the government, because they use this poison called rotenone, and they would pour it into the water, suffocate all the fish, kill all of them, and then pour a neutralizer in there, and then it was safe for you to drink the water again. And I'm like, yeah, right. And so I started, commercial fishing down there, and I got this phone call this one day, and it was shortly after the spill, and it was my sister Pamela, and I was putting my tennis shoes on and getting ready to play hoops against the crew. And so I kicked open the door, and they were out there playing, and the phone rang, and I decided I wasn't going to answer it. And it was Pamela. And she said, Dune, the CEO just came out of his office in the Eyak Corporation headquarters and said, now the eyes of the world are focused on the ocean and the nation's worst oil spill, so we need to clear cut as fast as we possibly can. So what you need to do is come home now and fight for our land and our people, or don't bother coming home because there's not going to be anything left. And I realized right then that I had to do everything in my power to find the strength to stand up and be that voice for the other people who were afraid. And I had to sue my people. I had to take on my corporations. I had to stand there. But I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were many people that cared about the place, but there was no indigenous peoples that were willing to stand except my family and some of my cousins. And so we ended up having to go to court several times. They sued me a couple of times. But the bottom line was all I wanted was a right to vote and decide between conservation over development. And so what had happened was our corporation was able to vote. I didn't have to get a court order vote, but 87% of the shareholders voted in favor of conservation, and we did it 13 more times in the spill zone, saving over 700,000 acres of trees. And this led to paying indigenous peoples over $400 million to leave their trees standing and protecting their subsistence way of life. What a concept. So my feeling is that what we needed to do was to figure out how we could continue doing conservation, because one of the deals that I did not like about that transaction was that it had to be 1/3 conservation easement or development restriction, 1/3 timber harvesting rights, and then 1/3 fee simple title, which meant that we had to give up title to our land in the name of conservation. And so I decided to start the Native Conservancy Land Trust. And so it would not just protect endangered plants and animals, but endangered peoples and their culture. And I felt that this was really important because we're all fighting over the same pots of money when it comes to conservation around the planet. So the best thing that we could possibly do is create a new avenue, a new way of funding and bring humanity into conservation. So I felt that by starting the Native Conservancy Land Trust with the amazing Winona LaDuke, the amazing Wiccan leader Sarah James, and my sister Pamela, that we could make a difference. Now there's several organizations around the state, indigenous peoples, that want to start Native Conservancy chapters so they can start buying and purchasing up endangered lands and native allotments that tribal members own, that they're selling to outsiders, to people who want to develop the land or turn it into a guide business. So I really feel that the Native Conservancy will be a good avenue for them to look at retaining those lands and not having to give them up in fee title, but preserving and protecting them for all time. Then I wasn't done there. I decided that we would start a fire fund, which was the Fund for Indigenous Rights in the Environment. And the idea there was to create an organization that I could help indigenous peoples on the front line address issues on a very quick basis, so we could make a decision on Friday and take action by Monday. This way we could take our money and work with other foundations as a matching donation. We could double or triple the monies in a very quick time. Like just recently, we started a whole truth campaign to bring out the truth about Exxon right before the U.S. Supremes heard the case. And we realized that all of their folks were getting their word out that everything was cleaned up and it was okay in the sound, but we realized that in order to get our voice to be heard, we had to organize. So the Fire Fund put down $10,000 and 4 or 5 other organizations matched it, and we were able to get our word out there fairly quickly. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supremes weren't listening to the people, nor did they care about the environment or our losses to our way of life. So Exxon was able to get away with only a $500 million settlement, which they're opposing the interest right now. And so that is really difficult because, again, the people who live from the land in the ocean are the ones who are going to have to protect the land and protect their way of life. So the most important thing that we can do right now is restore what has been destroyed and preserve what's still intact. The idea with the Fire Fund is also to be able to network with foundations and organizations where we wouldn't normally be viewed as peers, as you know, being on the same level. Usually we're grantees. So it changes the dynamics a little bit, having a Native Conservancy and an endowment. But I think it's really important that we all realize that we still have to collaborate and network and direct energy, whether that's time, money, or love, whatever direction that we need to, in order to create the change that we want to see in the world. When I think about what has happened and where we're going right now, one of the things that I wanted to leave you with is a really important message, and that is that we need to figure out how to sustain ourselves in these times of great hardship and uncertainty. I mean, as we can all see, the world is crashing around us as we know it, and things are changing on a daily basis. But what we decided to do on our end is we started several nonprofits, and we're in the process of starting several for-profits. And we came up with a new equation about 6-8 months ago, and it reads, nonprofit plus for-profit equals social profit. We wanted to figure out how to float our own boat in 5 years or less, so because of the hardship of the different foundations and them consolidating and merging and becoming more tight in how their funding is to be spent, because they want to see more slam dunks. They want to see more organized nonprofits, and at the same time, they're going to have to really tighten their belt as well. But if we're working together in our own communities and forming for-profit entities that are sustainable and good for the planet, and they complement the mission that we're doing in our nonprofit work, then we'll create that social profit, because the bottom line is we're all social change artists, and we just need to figure out how to take care of ourselves during these crazy times. A couple of the companies, just so you know, what we're starting is Copper River Wild Salmon Company. So I'm working with a bunch of my fishing buddies that I grew up with, so we can direct market and value add some of the wildest, highest omega seafoods on the planet, the Copper River salmon, to all of you. The other is we're opening an engine company. We're going to work with Steyr Engine out of Austria, which has made a high-performance biodiesel compatible boat engine, and they're also making hybrid engines, so we'll be able to look at the carbon footprint from the seafood industry and reduce it as much as we possibly can. So we put two of the engines in one of our partners' boats last year, and he averaged 4 gallons an hour, or 50 gallons a period, and compared to 150 gallons for the other folks. So that'll make a big difference, just having that alone. We're building a school at Night Island called the Oceanic Institute. We're opening 2 eco lodges next year. We're starting our wild salmon preserve legislation, calling for wild salmon forever, and who can argue with that? The last thing I'd like to do is I would like all of you to stand, and when we get done with our river trips, what happens is we bring everybody together before we get back on the river the next day, and we circle up and we hold hands. So, first shake it out and get rid of whatever's going on in you, and then hold hands, and then I'll hold somebody's hand here, so we're all linked together. And everybody out there in Bioneer land, you do that too. So stand up, and we're all together. So imagine that we're standing on the edge of the Copper River, and we feel the energy of the river, the sounds of the river, that we feel the energy of the water, because it's letting off a mist that is cleansing our aura as we're standing there. And we can hear the silt swishing in the water as it's going by us at 10, 12 knots. And we can feel the silt below our feet, and we're standing on it, we're part of it. And we are the animals, we are the bears, we are the river. And imagine that we're one tribe, and we're one spirit, with one mind, with one heart, with one mission. And we all know what we have to do. On November 4th, change is coming, and you're all going to be a part of it. So I love you all, and thank you for your time.
Love you too. Woo.
All right. Thank you.